Very first item, fossil fuel subsidies. Without giving us a university course on that, first place, could you give us a number for what the entire cost is, and maybe describe two things very quickly, what they are. That you mentioned the capital cost allowance, but if there are other subsidies that could go one way or the other, the fossil fuel, and the history of that, why we have subsidies to the fossil fuel industry.
The history is 1996. It was the year in which oil was selling for under $30 a barrel, and the tar sands were not commercial, and people were not investing in them in the way that the Alberta government had hoped they would invest. So Ralph Klein delivered in that year, 96, the lowest royalty rates anywhere on the planet, 1%, until a company becomes profitable. And Jean Chrétien joined him in this effort by creating accelerated capital cost allowances that allowed essentially the write-off for tax purposes of the investments in capital equipment that were going into the oil sands. As a result, meaning that in that year of 1996, there was about 500,000 barrels of oil a day out of the tar sands. We're now at 1.9 million barrels of oil a day. The government has said, and Jim Flaherty has said in previous budgets, that he's prepared to cut these subsidies. They still come in at about $1.2 billion a year. They've said they'll cut them. They are grandfathering existing levels of commitments. They are not cutting those. New projects are not supposed to get this accelerated capital cost allowance. So that's it in a nutshell. And the International Energy Agency has made it really clear. There are still globally about $300 billion in subsidies to fossil fuels. Compare that. You hear a lot about how renewable energy is subsidized. Renewables get about globally $30 billion a year in subsidies. The International Energy Agency has said if we're serious about climate, we need to do two things. We need to price carbon, which we don't do in this budget. I didn't think there was any point in pitching to Jim Flaherty that the Green Party believes we need a carbon tax. That's still our policies and our platform. But the International Energy Agency, the OECD, a lot of very mainstream agencies globally have said immediately two things: cut fossil fuel subsidies to zero and put in carbon pricing. Yes.
Joseph Rini, World Business Press Online. May I have three questions? Just shortly. First, regarding to your intention to cut the corporation, to increase corporation taxes. Don't you afraid that some corporation can fled the country abroad when you increase? And then the second one about the subsidies to biotechnology. Why biotechnology is bad?
Okay, so why were we worried that people would flee the country? We're still, even with the 19% corporate tax rate that we're recommending, we'd still be below the U.S., we'd still be below we'd still be competitive within the OECD, so no, we don't think companies would flee. And of course, the corporate tax rate only applies on those corporations who actually have a profitable operation in which they're paying corporate taxes. So we don't, unlike the EI increases that Jim Flaherty has imposed, which really do threaten businesses that are on the margin of whether they can survive with the increased cost, it increases the incentive for businesses to reduce staff when the cost per employee goes up, regardless of whether they're making money or not. So this is a very strong plea from the Independent Businesses of Canada, the Small Business Association. That's a tax that really is a limiting factor on the economy recovering, is the increased, what are generally called payroll taxes. Why biotech? Look, the notion of a government that's trying to tell its citizens that it's serious about austerity, but continues to put federal tax money into an industry that, if poll after poll shows that Canadians want the foods that have genetically modified organisms in them, they want them labeled. The government refused to do it. The government has taken, and it's not just Stephen Harper, before Stephen Harper, the previous Liberal governments, have laid their bets on biotech being something that they want to be behind. They want to support and subsidize with tax dollars. So much so that they don't allow food products with genetically modified organisms to be labeled so that consumers can make a choice. I think if consumers can't make a choice on what's on their shelves, taxpayers should be allowed to make a choice about what their tax dollars support. And there's a lot of support for pharmacare. There's a lot of support for affordable housing. There's a lot of support for First Nations education. And I guess there might be some people who said, if you've taken care of affordable housing and First Nations education, and we're living up to our climate change commitments, if you had some money left over and you want to throw it at the biotech industry, maybe that's not so bad. But we are in a time of choices, and I don't think you'll find even a slender minority of Canadian public opinion that likes the idea that we continue to support the biotech industry with the kind of support we do.
Last question about the cooperation maybe with NDP, which in some points have similar programs to you. So are you going to cooperate with NDP to push your ideas forward?
Toujours, j'ai travaillé pour la coopération avec tous les autres chefs des autres partis. Avec M. Harper, c'est très difficile. Avec M. Ray, je trouve que peut-être c'est plus facile qu'avec M. Mulcair. C'est une question vraiment pour M. Mulcair. Je suis très intéressant avec les politiques et les idées de Nathan Cullen, et j'espère que dans les prochaines années, c'est évidemment que nous avons besoin dans les partis plus progressifs d'avoir peut-être seulement les conversations. Peut-être ce n'est pas très facile de trouver une façon pour travailler ensemble dans une période des élections fédérales. Mais sauf les occasions pour parler ensemble, c'est impossible d'imaginer un programme sérieux de mettre sur pied dans les élections fédérales, un programme de coopération. I'm always keen to find ways to cooperate across party lines with all parties. Our current first past the post electoral system creates a very unhealthy dynamic in elections where people are so worried that they're going to somehow waste their vote by voting for what they care about, because we wouldn't have this conversation about the need for cooperation if we had a sensible voting system. If we had proportional representation, this problem wouldn't come up. But every election it comes up, and I think we need to work towards proportional representation, and we also need to find ways that we can cooperate. Yeah.
An example of how the telecommunications, like a meeting that might have been used this sort of this change to save money, like just a concrete example.
Okay, one concrete example was in my in the federal election campaign last spring. I discovered, and I was thrilled to find, that the former head of the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, Linda Keane, wanted to endorse me in my election campaign in Saanich-Gulf Islands, which was particularly relevant since I was running against Gary Lunn, who had been the minister who decided to fire her. It wasn't a personal thing. She wasn't trying to get back at him. She just had gotten to know him, and she'd gotten to know me, and she wanted to make this endorsement. Her schedule simply didn't accommodate coming out to BC. I didn't want, in the middle of the election campaign, I had a lot of national travel during the campaign as national leader, but when she was available in Ottawa was not a good time for me to make the trip to Ottawa. What we did was we used something, and forgive me for using a brand name, but Cisco has something called telepresence rooms. And we used a telepresence room at the Vancouver Island Technology Center and a telepresence room here in Ottawa. And you literally feel that you're sitting in the same room. There are tables around a screen in each location. We invited the media, so it was a press conference that took place with one group of media in Ottawa and one group of media on Vancouver Island. And we traded back and forth between questions from media in one place and the other place. But the quality of the image was so good that television images were broadcast in my region from people who were filming Linda sitting at a table in Ottawa. It has an extraordinary, it's a lot of steps up from Skype, and it's available. It's technology we could get. It has the advantage, just to give you a little bit more about this, you feel that you're in the same room, and one of the reasons is that when somebody speaks in the other room, the voice comes from where that person is sitting. So it's very much like the normal human interaction. You turn your head because someone's speaking, and they're thousands of kilometers away. But it shrinks that distance so that the utility of meetings, you do not need to be expending fossil fuels and taxpayers' dollars to have a lot of civil servants go across the country to meet with each other on government business. I mean, there may be sometimes that it is essential that they're in the same room. I mean, obviously, in terms of global climate negotiations, I bemoan the fact that we gather once a year in locations around the world. But literally, I've seen those meetings couldn't happen without people being able to engage one-on-one, go off in a corner and talk. But these government meetings could be using, and Cisco telepresence is one I've used to give you a practical example. No doubt there are others that shrink that distance to such an extent that you have absolutely as good a quality of experience of being in the same room, exchanging, having that meeting, and you can bring in other rooms. You can bring in people from across the country, and it's extremely efficient, and the meetings are very high quality. Quelques d'autres questions? Thank you very much for coming.